In the past couple of years, Japan's economy has started to look suspiciously normal. After decades of on and off deflation, prices have suddenly started rising, and Japan's central bank has taken interest rates into positive territory for the first time since 2016. But as Japan's economy has started to look more normal, markets have started to treat it more like, well, a normal economy, sparking declines in both Japan's currency, the yen, and Japan's government debt. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how Japan is quietly slipping into a debt crisis, and why this presents the central bank with a difficult dilemma. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's get straight into it. There are basically two things that should be worrying Japanese policymakers at the moment: the yen and government bonds. Both have been subject to dramatic sell-offs in recent weeks. As of Wednesday morning, for instance, the yen is trading at about 160 to the US dollar, an all-time low save for a brief slump in June 2024. Similarly, the sell-off in Japanese bonds has pushed yields, that is the annual interest rate that the Japanese government has to offer in order to attract buyers, up to an all-time high. The yield on a 30-year bond, for instance, is currently sitting at a tad above 3.5%, the highest on record, and up from less than 1% a couple of years ago. Similarly, the yield on a 20-year bond is currently a tad above 3.1%. The yield on a 10-year bond is slightly above 2%, and the yield on a 5-year bond is currently at about 1.6%. All record highs. So what's going on here? Well, at least some of this is due to inflation. For context, after a massive financial crisis in the early 90s, Japan experienced 3 years of basically zero inflation. Now, this might sound like a good thing, but most economists think that this deflation reflected the fact that the Japanese economy never really recovered from the crisis, which led to weak domestic demand and weak economic growth overall. However, the inflationary episode that swept the world a couple of years ago seems to have finally pushed Japan out of its deflationary funk. Year-on-year inflation rose from negative 1.1% in April 2021 to a peak of 4.3% in January 2023, and has stayed above 2% ever since. Japan now seems to be stuck in a mild wage price spiral. Persistent inflation has led workers to demand higher wages, which has meant more inflation, pushing workers to continue demanding wage increases, etc., etc. That Japan is finally out of its deflationary funk is probably a good thing in the round, but has put downward pressure on both the yen and Japanese government bonds. This is simply because investors want to be compensated for the fact that inflation is now eroding the real value of the yen over time. Think about it. When inflation was averaging zero, investors were happy with basically any yield on their bonds at all. But if inflation is now averaging 2%, investors will demand yields of at least 2%, because otherwise they'd be making a real terms loss. Similarly, international investors would presumably be more willing to hold the yen when its value was holding steady over time. Now that the yen's real value is being eroded by inflation, it's become less attractive as an asset. In this sense, the recent sell-off is symptomatic of the fact that the Japanese economy finally looks somewhat normal, and this probably isn't a bad thing. But while this might be partly about inflation, this sell-off has at least as much to do with anxieties about the state of Japan's public finances. For context, in an attempt to revive the economy during its 30-year deflationary funk, the Japanese government tried a lot of fiscal stimuluses, which required a lot of borrowing. According to IMF data, Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio rose from about 65% in 1990 to over 230% today, by far the highest in the world. This massive borrowing spree was facilitated by Japan's central bank, the Bank of Japan, or BOJ, which essentially printed money to buy up government debt. This worked fine when inflation wasn't a risk, but became more complicated given that further money printing will now probably mean more inflation, which is already above the BOJ's 2% target, and put more downward pressure on the yen. And these new fiscal anxieties have been exacerbated by the ascendance of Japan's new Prime Minister and LDP leader, Sanai Takaichi. For context, Takaichi replaced Shigeru Ishiba, who resigned late last year after his LDP Komeito coalition lost their majority in the upper house, having lost their majority in the lower house less than a year earlier. Takaichi is sort of the protege of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and is an outspoken advocate of Abe's economic program, known as Abenomics, which basically involves lots of debt-funded spending and deregulation. But while Abenomics might have made sense a decade or so ago, when Japan was still stuck in its deflationary funk, it makes less sense, or at least that's what the bond markets apparently think today, when inflation is already running hot and Japan's debt burden is where it is. Takeuchi originally signaled that she would pursue a more moderate economic policy, but last month she announced that next year's budget would be the largest on record, and rumours are currently swirling that she might call a snap election in the coming days. Polling currently suggests that Takeuchi would win handsomely. Her approval rating has hovered around 70% since she took office, with a net approval rating of positive 50. This is a dramatic improvement on Ishiba, who had net approval ratings around negative 20 when he left office, and would almost definitely be enough to get her a majority in the lower house. This might be good news for the LDP, but it's apparently spooked the bond markets, who worry that Takeuchi might use a majority to push through even more spending. If Takeuchi does push ahead with some Abenomics-inspired fiscal stimulus, this will exacerbate an already difficult dilemma for the BOJ. The obvious way to both stem the yen's ongoing decline and bring down inflation would be for the BOJ to raise interest rates, but this would push up bond yields even more, especially if Takeuchi is issuing more debt at the same time, taking Japan to the brink of a full-blown fiscal crisis. At this point, the BOJ might be tempted to just start buying up even more government debt, as it's done in the past, but this would have at least 3 negative consequences. First, more money printing would risk pushing up inflation. Second, it would imply that Japan's economy is never going back to normal, given that the BOJ has only recently started trying to reduce its bond purchases. But third, and most importantly, it would put downward pressure on the yen, because foreign investors wouldn't want to buy Japanese bonds with artificially low rates, which would require them to buy the yen in the first place. In other words, Takeuchi's spending plans are essentially forcing the BOJ to choose between a debt crisis and further declines in the yen. Whether or not you believe that the new year brings a new you, there's always pressure to find some way to better yourself when January rolls round. But where do you even start? Building new healthy habits isn't always easy to jump straight into. So that's why we always turn to Brilliant. That's because Brilliant focuses on real transformative learning, all on adapting to your own established skill level. It starts you at the right level based on your background, designs practice sets and reviews, all personalized for you. Brilliant helps you to advance at your ideal pace, giving you the best chance to stick to your learning goals. For example, even if you're not a maths person, Brilliant will push you towards achieving what you didn't think was possible. Their comprehensive catalogue takes you from foundational maths through to algebra, all the way to college-level calculus, with more and more courses being added each month. Brilliant has truly helped us to expand our skill set and kept us coming back every day to create those habits which help us grow. Suddenly, it's not so hard to stick to your resolutions. To start the new year right and begin or continue your learning journey, you can try Brilliant for free for a full 30 days. Just go to brilliant.org/TLDR, scan the QR code on screen, or click the link in the description. And Brilliant has also given our viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited access to everything on Brilliant.